Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live today on Tuesday afternoon. Today is September 3rd, and I guess another day, another Florida State loss, as last night they had their home debut against Boston College, one of the bottom-ranked teams in their own conference, and suffered an upset loss that has gotten their season off to a disastrous start. So we are going to dive into that game and talk about the bigger implications of what it means for both the program of Florida State and Mike Norvell's job security, as well as the overall implications that it has on the ACC that was already a little bit of a loser coming out of week one, and things only got worse with their other top contender in Florida State suffering that loss. So we're going to be diving into that, and with week one now in the books, we're going to additionally be looking ahead to week two to talk about some of the biggest games and storylines to keep an eye out for, and additionally, this weekend will not just have week two of college football, but the NFL is officially back. It kicks off on Thursday evening. So to start off the week here, we are just going to be running through the schedule, and I'm going to be giving my top 5 games and storylines to be paying attention to in this upcoming week. And then we're going to dive into a couple NFL-based stories. We are yet to, at least on this show, talk about Russell Wilson being named the starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was additionally just named the captain. So we'll be giving our thoughts on what the overall confidence level is in Russell Wilson to be able to bring the Steelers back to the playoffs this upcoming season, and whether or not he is going to be looking over his shoulder at Justin Fields throughout the year. And then finally, we're going to be capping off the show with a bit of an interesting story coming out of New England. Not that it has any impact on the team as a whole now, but former New England Patriots Super Bowl champion Rob Ninkovich spoke out on a podcast of his and discussed the fact of Mac Jones not being the leader that New England needs. And while he did praise Drake May during this process, he really tore down Mac Jones, and it sort of led me into a series of thoughts about whether or not New England was right to move off of Mac Jones. So we'll be diving into that. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. And we here at the GSMC Podcast Network thrive off of the interaction with our fans. So whether you have a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or anything in between, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts. And if you would consider becoming a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Or you can use the super chat feature that is now available on YouTube to get your comments to pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated on either one of those notes. We're starting off, though, talking about Florida State's loss last night to Boston College, as it has been a disastrous start to the season for Florida State. Now 0-2. Mike Norvell spoke to the media last night, and he said, quote, "I'm sick to how the season started. I apologize to the fans. I apologize to everybody associated with the program. That was extremely disappointing." And that it was, as Florida State fell 28-13 versus Boston College, one of their ACC rivals, that this was supposed to be a little bit of a get-right game for Florida State coming off of their loss in Ireland versus Georgia Tech, and things did not get any better for them. And the conversation with Florida State does, to a large degree, start with the play of FSU quarterback DJ Uiagalelei, who did not look comfortable once again yesterday. 21 of 42, 272 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. This was a very messy game for him, and you could see him under pressure throughout the entirety of it. And it had me thinking as well, especially given this matchup against Boston College, where Thomas Castellanos is a nice college quarterback, but not a great passer of the ball. And I think that the difference between the two of them, obviously besides the fact that DJ was, of course, a 5-star coming into college and he had all of these expectations on him, is the fact that DJ doesn't really have that playmaking ability, the create on your own type that Castellanos had on the other side. And that was just so prominent because both of these quarterbacks were facing pressure throughout the entirety of the night. I think that Boston College ultimately probably did a better job of protecting their quarterback. But that being said, the times where pressure was getting through, Castellanos was making people miss in the backfield, scrambling out, and at least just turning negative plays into, net even plays, or even picking up a couple extra yards when it seemed like he was going to get sacked in the backfield. And DJ on the other side just seems like when it isn't directly available to him, he doesn't really have a second gear that he can switch into. He had one scramble that I was, semi-impressed with, where he used Roydell Williams as a lead blocker, but even on that play, it's just not the same level of impact that you have. And there's a lot more bad than good overall when I think you talk about DJ's overall mobility. And I think that it's very tough because DJ gets a ton of flack because of the lack of success from Florida State, which is fair because he's the quarterback. And especially in this game, I thought that he was more responsible for the loss than in the Georgia Tech game. But that being said, there is not a lot of help that he has around him at this point. When you look at the play of Florida State up to this point, nobody's really been contributing all that much for him on the other end. Where you look at the running game, they have two very capable running backs in Roydell Williams, in Lawrence Toafili, and neither one of them is giving Florida State anything. Last night, it was Williams, 3 carries, 10 yards, Toafili, 1 carry for 5 yards. It was overall just a mess, and the team finished with just 26 yards on handoffs, which is nowhere near good enough, especially when you're talking about playing in inferior program. Just objectively speaking, Florida State, the stature of that program versus Boston College, there should be a clear difference there. Now, Boston College, we're going to talk a little bit about them. I do want to give credit to Bill O'Brien and the staff for being able to look entirely like an improved team from last year. Last season was a good one for Boston College, ultimately becoming bowl eligible, winning against SMU. But I was actually at the BC Florida State game last year that was in Boston College, and the difference in penalties and how well run the teams were was very clear. Last night, Boston College just 1 penalty. If you go back to a year ago, that game was pretty much lost based off of penalties down the stretch of the game. Florida State, I thought, and this is something that I stood on all year long, I thought they were lucky to get away with that win last year. And this time around, it didn't even come down to penalties. That being said, Florida State was the shakier run team in terms of penalties. They kept sort of getting in their own way, and it wasn't just the penalties either. Of course, it was the receiving core where, again, I mentioned DJ, it's tough. I'm not trying to back myself into a corner here where I'm this huge DJ fan, but I also think that it's a little bit irresponsible to say that this is entirely on his shoulders for Florida State's 0-2 start. Now, what I said after the Georgia Tech game still stands today. There's a difference between not losing because of you and an inability to win because of somebody. And DJ, if he really was that superstar that he was anticipated to be when he came into the college scene, he would be able to pull out some games or at least make them more competitive in regards to the Florida State offense last night. But he can't do everything, and he can't, hand the ball off to himself. He can't catch his own passes. Last night was a brutal performance from a lot of the Florida State receivers, in my opinions, and not just the receivers, but Toafili, I thought on a couple plays had some chances to make more of a difference in the passing game. DJ also partially responsible for that as well. Could have placed, you can always place the ball a little bit better, but Toafili had a couple misplays in my opinion. Tight end Kyle Morlock, 3 drops and 0 catches in this game, including one on the goal line. I think one of them occurred on 3rd down as well. He had a really brutal performance. This is somebody that Florida State was anticipating could be a big-time player for them, and you just don't. It feels like on paper they should have more playmakers than they do, but we are yet to see that actually take place on the field offensively. And then when you look at the defensive side of the ball as well, it is one of the biggest surprises in all of college football to me is how bad Florida State's defenses looked. Because last year, even when Jordan Travis was playing, the identity of that team, in my opinion, was their defensive prowess, and now that just does not seem to be the case whatsoever. Now, they lost 5 starters from last season to this year, so obviously there was some turnover, but they have some key pieces, and specifically when I talk about this, I'm looking at the front 7 and the defense against the run. Last week, 190 rush yards allowed to Georgia Tech. Just last night, 263 rushing yards allowed to Boston College. And it's not like in either one of these games it was a surprise that they were going to come out and have that be their offensive identity. We're talking about Georgia Tech, who led the ACC in rush yards per game last year, along with the majority of other significant rushing stats. And Boston College, where, again, I mentioned Thomas Castellanos, sort of, he's a fine passer for sure. He's good, but he's not great. His special ability is his playmaking with his legs. So it's not like either one of these teams were anticipated in Georgia Tech and Boston College to be airing it out big time. You need to help out that front 7, and to some degree as well, your guys up front just have to make plays way too often. And what I will say about this is it's not like it's just handing it off to a running back and, every single play running a dive up the middle. These are a bit more complex schemes. You look at Haynes King, the Georgia Tech quarterback. He's a dual threat. Castellanos, like we've mentioned a couple times, is as well. So, I understand that it's not just black and white, very easy blueprint to solve, but some of their edge contain was just so undisciplined, and Castellanos was just able to run free. And ultimately, I don't know what the issue totally is there. Now, part of it is the fact that this is a team in Florida State that is definitely, we give so much flack as well to Clemson for their lack of being in the transfer portal. Florida State's on the other side, where maybe you can make an argument that they overutilize it, especially offensively. You just see the lack of cohesion and chemistry between DJ and his intended targets, so there's that. Defense, you can make a lot of the same arguments as well, but that being said, you still have guys up front that are supposed to be those difference makers in a Patrick Payton or a Joshua Farmer, and both of them are good in, limited moments. I thought that Payton, as the game went on, he was, stood out to me a little bit more of doing his duty of containing, but it's not a one-man show. It's the entire grouping of that front 7 just has not been good enough, and as a result, they're getting run up and down the field on. That leads to shorter 3rd downs. BC last night was 9 of 16 on 3rd downs in comparison to Florida State, who couldn't run the ball at all. They were 3 of 14 on 3rd downs, and that in large part had to do with the difference in the yards to gain in those situations because of the fact of the difference in the success running the ball. But additionally, Boston College's offense was on the field for what felt like just about the entire game. They absolutely dominated the time of possession in this matchup, and that's on a couple things. It's on the defense for you have to be able to get those stops on third downs and get off the field. BC didn't even go for it on fourth down in the entire game because they were never put in that position in which they had to force some punts. That's something that Florida State was unable to do. But that being said, to the time of possession argument, I will say that does also fall on the offense a little bit, where how about you actually extend a drive and give your defense some rest? Florida State went 3 and out on each of their first 3 drives and overall just struggled to put together lengthy drives. Meanwhile, we're now looking at two weeks of Georgia Tech. We saw it at the end of the game. DJ and the offense, they finally put something together on that final drive in the fourth quarter, tie the game up with 6:33 left, and Georgia Tech just milks the clock, and ultimately 6.5 minutes is gone, and they're kicking a game-winning field goal to upset you in Ireland. So, again, it's the overall team. Again, you want to point fingers at the player who has the ability to have the biggest impact in DJ Uiagalelei, and I do understand that, but at the same time, Florida State's problems right now are significantly deeper than just what they have at quarterback. And because Florida State is such a flawed team right now, in my opinion, and I don't think that's an overreaction at this point, the ACC is definitely in trouble because of this, considering the fact that they just saw a number of their top contenders, ideally in the eyes of the ACC commissioners, seeing a bunch of their top contenders for the playoffs lose in this first week, where now Florida State is 0-2. Clemson lost to Georgia, so a respectable loss, but it was more so the way that they just had no fight in the second half, got dominated. Their offense is still yet to sort of recapture some of the magic from those Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson years that they are definitely struggling at the current moment, albeit just week 1, so don't want to overreact too much there. But Virginia Tech losing to Vanderbilt was the only double-digit upset, I believe, outside of this Florida State game. But the only double-digit upset on Saturday, at least, for any of these teams to win. And Vanderbilt picked to be last in the SEC, ends up taking it to Virginia Tech and winning in overtime. So it's been a really tough look for the ACC and what is a critical year for them to be able to continue to prove that they can keep their ground with the SEC and the Big Ten. And it has been a rough start up to this point. Now, still early in the year. That being said, Florida State at this point, ESPN flashed a graphic. This was during the first quarter that with a loss, Florida State had just a 1% chance to make the college football playoffs. And that's about where we stand now, which is a big time concern for the conference as a whole. But let me know what your takeaways from this game were in the comment section. Again, we try not to be too hyperbolic on this show and get ahead of ourselves with these overreactions, but at this point, I don't know how you can have all that much confidence in Florida State. And one last thing to sort of cap off this discussion is just the idea of, I am a bit curious sort of what the job security for Mike Norvell looks like. Again, definitely do not want to jump to any conclusions. I haven't seen much traction on this whatsoever, just sort of talking it out here. But Norvell is now in his 3rd season where Florida State has started 0-2, and each of the past 2 seasons, the Seminoles have ended up under 500. So they could be looking at another bad season. And if that's the case, what does the future look like for Norvell at Florida State? Because again, I think that these couple losses, the fact of not making the adjustment from week 0 to week 1 in terms of facing the rushing attack and knowing that you're going to play a quarterback that can run the ball as well, it's pretty inexcusable in my eyes. And we could be looking at, we'll see how this plays out, but we could be looking at Florida State with 3 losing seasons in 5 years for Mike Norvell, especially coming into this year, starting the season ranked number 10 in the AP preseason poll. So I don't know, just sort of talking it out here, but definitely let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But with this game now officially wrapped up, week 1 of college football is in the books, and we are going to be taking a look ahead at week 2 and what is to come in college football, some of the biggest games and key storylines to keep an eye on. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing to dive into the world of college football. We just broke down Florida State's loss from last night, meaning that we are officially now on to week 2 of college football. And I just wanted to sort of look ahead here as to what the biggest games to keep an eye on are. And the main headliner, in my opinion, is Texas at Michigan. And this is a game between 2 top 10 teams currently. And I think that ultimately, we got 2 different pictures from them over the weekend. It's week 1 against opponents that weren't ever really going to push them all that much. So it's hard to take all too much away from it. Now, what I will say is Michigan's offense did seem to really struggle for a lot of that game against Fresno State, where ultimately it sort of came down to their defense making the sort of dagger play of Will Johnson's pick 6 to sort of put away Fresno State for good. But ultimately, Fresno was in this game for a while. They were driving. I believe they were in the red zone by the time Will Johnson scored the pick 6, taking it all the way down the length of the field. I think it was an 86-yard touchdown. So, ultimately, I do think that it's not a big deal. You can't overreact to Michigan looking a little bit sloppy, but it is something to take into consideration, at least, that I don't know if they have all of the answers right now. And a lot of fans have speculated that Michigan was just sort of trying to hold off a little bit in terms of showing their offensive firepower because of the fact that this game coming up against Texas is a real measuring stick game, and this is what was going to be extremely important for the sake of their season as a whole. But at the same time, I just don't know if I have confidence in the quarterback play from Michigan to really believe that that's all it was a play calling difference, that they just wanted to give a different look. Davis Warren ends up winning the starting job, and I still don't think I'm all that sold on him at this point. Now, very small sample size would be unfair to, jump to any extreme conclusions on that front, but I don't think that he looked very impressive. It sounded like Alex Orji for a while was going to win that starting job, but that doesn't end up being the case. Maybe it's something that could be sort of worked with a little bit more as the season goes on. Michigan is not unfamiliar to the idea of utilizing multiple quarterbacks in order to, provide different looks for opposing teams. They did that sort of pre-JJ McCarthy. a lot is new right now with Michigan under the leadership of Sharon Moore. So we'll see how it works out. I mean, this would be, you talk about, proving yourself for Sharon Moore. This would be the game to do so. You get it at home, which is a big deal for them. I'm fairly certain. Let me double check that it's not a neutral site game, but I'm fairly certain that this game, yes, is in Ann Arbor. So they at least have that going for them. But I mean, ultimately, I do worry about sort of how this could play out. But a matchup between two top 10 teams, again, even if I am a little bit skeptical about Michigan for this upcoming season, that being said, they still have incredible talent on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that, they can match up. They should be able to match up on the line of scrimmage with just about any team. And Texas is the real deal, absolutely. They just demolished Colorado State to the point where that's why I haven't even really brought up that game, is because they were so good that there wasn't any real competitive takeaways to come out of it. But that being said, Michigan, they're going to have an opportunity to sort of show the world that last year it wasn't all Jim Harbaugh, and that, there are levels to this program that is one of the more well-renowned ones in the country, and they hope to not take a step backwards this upcoming year. So that's the main headliner of the weekend. I will say, definitely have eyes on Tennessee at NC State. We just talked about with Florida State's loss, the ACC has seen a number of their top competitors fall already. And even NC State, it was a bit of a slow start for them versus Western Carolina, but Grayson McCall did seem to get more comfortable as the game progressed, and they were able to close it out what felt pretty handedly by the end of that game. Maybe, again, you want to go with the idea that they didn't want to show all too much against Tennessee. Again, I think that it's a little bit of a bogus argument, generally speaking, for just about any team, but if you have different thoughts on that, let me know in the comment section. But this is a huge opportunity for NC State. I admittedly, headed into the season, did not give them all that much of a shot in the ACC. I thought that there was a little bit of a dividing line between the likes of Miami, Clemson, and FSU, and then you had NC State. But, with Clemson and Florida State both losing, and Virginia Tech as well, which is one of those other teams that were sort of potentially hovering in the mix for the conference title, NC State has an excellent chance to sort of separate themselves and show that people like myself should have been taking them more seriously. And they get a chance against a Tennessee team that, absolutely rolled over Chattanooga last weekend, but is still a little bit of a younger team. You're talking about quarterback Nico Iamaleava, a freshman that doesn't have all that much experience up to this point, that you can, if you can bring the heat on him defensively a little bit. He was sitting comfortable all game long versus Chattanooga, and I talked about this yesterday. I was blown away with the arm talent that he was able to display. But obviously, it's not just about sitting back and throwing. It's about how do you handle the pressure that's coming in front of you. That's something that if they can move Iamaleava off of his spot a little bit, we could see some of those growing pains, and we could see NC State potentially take advantage. Again, it was a messy game last week. They defensively as well, I don't think that they were perfectly coherent either. I am blanking on the name. I have it somewhere here in my notes. But their starting linebacker ended up getting ejected on the first drive of the game versus Western Carolina, I should say. Caden Fordham, he ends up getting ejected at the very start of the game. But you have some playmakers on defense. Cornerback Aiden White as well as somebody that I'm definitely keeping an eye on, as, again, Nico Iamaleava is going to get tested at some point. Can NC State be sort of the wake-up call for him? Now is the time to sort of strike if you are an opposing defense before he really gets himself going into the world of college football, that, I think that NC State has a great chance this week to, sort of put the ACC back on track a little bit. But if not, it could be some tough sledding for the conference as a whole moving forward. I'm also keeping my eyes on Boise State at Oregon. As of this afternoon, when I just went to check, Oregon is a 19.5-point favorite, and I think it could be a little bit closer than that as well. Oregon not overreacting to how the game went last week against Idaho. They were tested unexpectedly by Idaho. That's something, Oregon fans definitely don't feel great about. Some concerns maybe with the offensive line, and the penalties were really the big thing, sort of also going hand in hand with that offensive line. It was maybe slightly concerning, but that being said, Oregon, I think that they have the right guy in charge of it all in Dillon Gabriel. Even if the offense wasn't, perfect last week, I still think that Dillon Gabriel is more than capable of leading Oregon to a big-time season this upcoming year. So I still like Oregon a lot. That being said, Boise State's kind of a sleeper team, a team that could end up making the playoffs based off of, I would say that they are, in contention for being the fifth highest ranked conference winner, playing in the Mountain West, that I think really should be run through them, that they have a great chance to make the playoffs. And I'm not saying for them to go into Oregon and end up taking this game, but this is also a situation where just show that you're competitive. Oregon is a huge measuring stick for just about any team, and ultimately, Boise State, they at least have their identity with Ashton Jeanty, who went berserk in the first game of the season for Boise State. 20 carries, 267 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Now, this was a game against Georgia Southern that can be a little bit of an underrated program. That being said, they put up points against Boise State. That does have me a little bit concerned as to whether or not Boise can sort of hold on to Dillon Gabriel and this Oregon offense, that they're going to need to score points. They're going to need to see positive steps from Maddox Madsen, their quarterback, in order to make that happen. But again, I'm looking at that 19.5-point spread. Maybe it's, maybe I'm getting suckered into it, but I think that Boise State can at least stay alive in this game. And then the last game I just sort of wanted to point to as well. Sneaky game, I would argue, between Arkansas and Oklahoma State, considering the fact that, we've talked so much about the idea of it's the Big Ten and the SEC, and it's sort of everyone else from there. Oklahoma State, we actually did just have the rankings drop while we were doing this show, so a little live reaction to this, but Oklahoma State moves up one spot. They end up at number 16. This is a matchup against an Arkansas team that was picked to be at the bottom of the SEC. And, last week we saw the bottom team in that SEC preseason poll, and Vanderbilt able to upset Virginia Tech to sort of start the season off right for the SEC. And again, I just feel like for the Big 12 and the ACC, it is all about them trying to find a way to just sort of hang in there as well. And this is a matchup that Oklahoma State should certainly win. That's the idea. They are favored in this game. I can double check to see if the line's moved. It is Oklahoma State by 7.5. So I think it's a pretty big game for the Big 12 as a whole as well. And just kind of, again, following Vanderbilt's win last week, kind of just curious to see sort of the SEC supremacy. What level is that? Was last week a fluke against Virginia Tech? Was it more of just an indictment on the overall standing of the ACC? A lot of questions that can be asked from a conference perspective from last week. So that is also a game that I'm keeping my eyes on. But a whole lot of action. Let me know what your thoughts are, what your highlight games are we'll probably come to you with a little bit more of an extensive poll ranking reaction, because we don't have the time for it maybe necessarily today, but I'm definitely interested to dive into those. Anthony Manzano comments, do you think what needs to happen with Florida is what happened with Miami? On Kirk Herbstreit called out the incompetence of the athletic department and the hiring process for coaches at Miami. So I'm assuming you are talking, previous iterations of Miami, considering the fact that now they seem to be in a position where they can be the top competitor in the ACC. As of Florida, I mean, obviously, Billy Napier at this point sort of has a, red dot aimed right at him, considering the fact that he gets blown out at home against the in-state rival of Miami, and then he proceeds to talk about how, kind of attacking the fans a little bit. This is a very ESPN type segment, but there was a quote that was aggregated that the team shouldn't focus on, quote, what some guy in his basement staying in rural Central Florida on social media has to say, or something along those lines. That I think that Napier, I mean, yeah, there is, I don't know. I'm not going to say that he's incompetent yet in terms of his coaching ability. I mean, it's not good right now as things stand. And in that game as well, I mean, Graham Mertz did get hurt for whatever it's worth as well. Florida wasn't winning that game anyways, but that's a pretty big obstacle to overcome as well. So I have not seen any updates on Mertz as of this point. I'm assuming the fact that I haven't heard anything means that he's probably all right. But, be sure, feel free to fact check me in the comment section if I'm off on that one. But, I mean, I don't know if Miami, to your question, Anthony, I don't know if I'm ready to put Miami as sort of the gold standard of how to fix it. Seems like it's headed in the right direction and they're on an upwards trend. I've been on Miami since the beginning of the season, that I think they have an excellent opportunity to not just win the conference, especially now so after some of these games, but actually be a more serious national championship contender than people really gave them credit for headed into the season, where they were ranked number 19. Again, we're going to have to move on here, but I do want to actually briefly check here where Miami is ranked. So they're up 7 spots to number 12. So, I don't think that what's happening to Florida right now, I mean, they're going to have to iron out the answers, but to be honest, I mean, I think that there's probably, it starts with the coaching, but it's been a mess in Florida for years, especially when you talk about just the overall ability to not get in their own way. That, I don't know. I am definitely concerned long-term about Florida, and we'll see how it works, because they have a buzzsaw of a schedule coming in ahead for the remainder of the season. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We're now going to be switching gears to the NFL. And to start off, now that this is officially opening week, I'm going to list my top 5 favorite games and storylines for the upcoming week. So we will be diving into that. But first, we'll be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are now officially at NFL opening week. And to celebrate, we're going to start off by giving my top 5 favorite games and storylines to pay attention to in the upcoming week or so. So to start off, we'll give some honorable mentions as well. I think that Dallas at Cleveland is a very interesting game, considering the fact that both of these teams have a lot to prove in different ways almost. The Cowboys obviously being the Cowboys, understanding that they have all of these financial deadlines ahead of them with the idea of Dak Prescott's contract extension as well as Micah Parsons, Mike McCarthy being on the hot seat. How will they respond this upcoming year? And I think it's a very tough matchup for them at Cleveland, where Browns still have one of the best defenses in the NFL. We'll talk about, Deshaun Watson and what he looks like in what should still be a good defense now without Deron Bland for the first couple months of the season. So definitely a little bit of a different look Cowboys team, but still should be overall a good defense now coached by Mike Zimmer, which I actually think could be an upgrade over Dan Quinn. So this is a game that I'm definitely looking forward to. I feel like all the public money is probably going to be on the Cowboys, but don't sleep on the Browns either, because that is a very tough football team. And the other honorable mention, a little playoff rematch from last night. Matt Stafford going back to Ford Stadium in Detroit to try and avenge the playoff loss. This is one that initially I had higher on my list, but the reason why I bumped it down, I think entertainment-wise, it should definitely be there, and the Rams are going to come ready to play. But I do have my concerns with the Rams this upcoming season, that I think that they could see a little bit of a drop-off from last year, whether we're talking about the health status of Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp as well, that this is overall a team that, is sort of hanging on by a thread a little bit, trying to balance all of the up-and-coming defensive players while also relying a lot on some older offensive skill position players that have, accumulated some injuries over the past few years. So, again, a couple honorable mentions there. But number 5, I have the Houston Texans versus the Indianapolis Colts. And this is a game that I think could fly very much under the radar for a lot of casual NFL fans. And I don't know where I stand entirely on the overall hype level for Anthony Richardson and the Colts. I don't think it's going to be quite as smooth as everybody anticipates, but that being said, there are 100% going to be flashes this season from Anthony Richardson. And last year, if I'm not mistaken, I think Anthony Richardson actually won his start against the Texans early on last year. One of his few games that he played that he looked good. And this is a Colts team playing at home against a division rival. I think it's going to be a lot tougher than people are anticipating, especially when you talk about the, public perception between these two teams. The Colts were, playing the Texans for that final playoff spot in Week 17 last year. And yes, there's been a ton of improvements and roster moves from the Texans that make things interesting in terms of, how serious of contenders are they? I do think pretty serious, but that being said, the Colts are not a team to overlook. I think that the Anthony Richardson storyline is very compelling, and watching him specifically go up against CJ Stroud, I think this can be a closer game than people are expecting going into it. But that is my number 5. Number 4, I have the Jaguars versus the Dolphins. Here at the GSMC Podcast Network, there's this whole sort of, mini debate going on between Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa. Either way, both of these quarterbacks getting massive contract extensions during the offseason, and a lot of doubters for both of them as to whether or not they are worth the money that they were just paid. Now, my take on that would be, I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to pan out. I have some more hesitations with Tua, but that being said, neither one of them have totally proven that they are worth quite the extent of money that they got, over $50 million a year. Both very promising players, but one playoff win combined between the two of them so far. Still early on. Wins are not a quarterback stat, so, I will sort of hedge myself there. But that being said, I mean, until we really see these guys step up in some big moments and put some consistency together is really the big thing for me, especially on the Trevor Lawrence front, where we've seen these flashes of greatness and top-end talent that made him the number 1 overall draft pick, but we haven't seen him be able to string it for, an entire season. Both of the past couple years have seen really high highs and really low lows, even, within the same exact game for Lawrence. If you look back to that Chargers win in the 2022 season. But ultimately, I think that this should be a good matchup between two teams that are sort of knocking on the door of being taken seriously, but haven't fully won over that respect just yet. So I do have this as a very interesting game in terms of, these two teams and these two quarterbacks solidifying their place in the overall hierarchy of the NFL. Number 3, I have the Packers versus the Eagles. Should be a very fun matchup between two of the top teams in the NFC. I will say, I think I dinged it a little bit because of the fact that this game is in Brazil, which is, I don't have all that much of a problem with it. It's a little bit weird, but also the NFL is trying to grow. That being said, though, we have the conversation with the London game every year that it does have an impact on the travel schedule and the body clocks of these players, that almost it feels like there's going to inherently be a built-in excuse for whichever team loses, I should say. So, I mean, I dinged it a little bit there, but these are two teams that could very easily be facing off in the NFC Championship game if things break right for them this upcoming year. You have Jordan Love coming off of a new contract extension. This idea of, was it a little bit of a fluke run at the end of last year, or is this really who they are rearing into being? Meanwhile, the Eagles had a little bit of an identity crisis by the end of last year, falling apart, having all of the offseason, stories about the relationship between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts and the dysfunction that occurred behind the scenes. But this is still a very talented team, two very talented teams, maybe on a little bit of different timelines here, but ultimately both with the same hope of coming out of the NFC. So I think it could be a very interesting game. Number 2, the New York Jets versus the San Francisco 49ers. Now, if I was going to, rank these just based off of how competitive I think the games will be, this might not have made it. I think the 49ers are still really good. I hear all the red flags and concerns about them having a Super Bowl losing hangover. If it happens, I can't say it would be the most shocking thing in the world, but in my eyes, this team has too much talent not to be great once again and be one of the top competitors. I think that, next year is when we're looking at the real implications of where they're at financially, that we could see a significant shakeup to their overall roster construction, but they're running it back this year with primarily the same group that they had last season that took them to the Super Bowl. A couple marginal pieces here and then out. Injuries, I mean, it's obviously not a great sign that Greenlaw is dealing with this torn Achilles, but they're also getting Talanoa Hufanga back in the secondary as well to sort of offset that to some degree. The reason this game is number 2, though, is because of the fact that we're going to see Aaron Rodgers hopefully play a full game for the New York Jets, and this has been one of the biggest NFL storylines over the past couple seasons, and it feels like, last year was just so anticlimactic, him going down at the very beginning of the year, that, the media and such was just sort of forcing this storyline of Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. Are they Super Bowl contenders now? Just sort of shoving it down our throats and then having it not even really be a discussion after 3 plays. So we're sort of back on that train again. I'm not confident in the Jets. I don't know if I can really buy into a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers coming off of a torn Achilles of, returning to form, even though the last time we saw him, he was already starting to decline. So it's on the table that, Rodgers just needs to be an upgrade at that quarterback position for the Jets to make the playoffs. But, I think just the real official debut of Rodgers in a Jets jersey, that alone does it for me. Kind of messed up of the NFL to put Rodgers' debut once again on Monday Night Football, considering how last year went. But at the end of the day, should be interesting to keep an eye on. And then the number one biggest game to watch, in every essence, it is the Ravens versus the Chiefs on Thursday Night Football, this upcoming week to kick off the season. This is a rematch of last year's AFC Championship game that did go down to the wire. Now, I think that we're going to get maybe some different versions of this team, maybe a little bit more competence on the offensive side for both of them. The defenses, both losing some key contributors. You look at L'Jarius Sneed for the Chiefs, now in Tennessee. Patrick Queen for the Ravens, now in Pittsburgh. So I expect there to be a little bit more offense in this game. We'll see about that, but ultimately, this game has, once again, the potential to be another AFC Championship matchup of the future. Lamar Jackson, I am hoping for his sake for him to have a bounce-back season. I think he was incredible all of last year, and part of it was him, 100% in that championship game. Part of it was also on the coaches, I thought, for abandoning the run game and going from the number one rushing offense in the league last year by a significant margin to sort of, abandoning that in the biggest moment of the season. I thought that was a crazy move, especially because that was sort of the biggest weakness on the Chiefs defense, but I digress there. I think this should be an excellent way to kick off the season. Really looking forward to it, and ultimately, I think that this is a matchup between two of the best teams in the NFL. This is all we've been wanting these past handful of months, and it's finally coming to us just a couple days from now. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section on any of these games, or maybe some other games that you think are also flying under the radar. But we are now going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, gonna be sharing my thoughts on Russell Wilson being named the starting quarterback and captain for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Talk about the expectations for him and the team as a whole moving forward this season. But first, this quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as I want to share some thoughts here on the fact that Russell Wilson, I actually haven't fully done a show here talking about the job competition between Wilson and Fields since Wilson was officially named the starter. So that broke last week. Just earlier, I think it was this morning, the Steelers named Russell Wilson a captain for the season, one of 4 players to be awarded that for whatever it's worth. These things are malleable anyways, but I just wanted to overall share the thoughts here because we have not yet. Russell Wilson did end up winning the job. not so much based off of how great he was in preseason games or what he showed in practice. I think it was more so that he came into the season with the almost priority based off of the fact that he was the first quarterback that the Steelers brought in. And I do think that you can have the debate as to who is a better quarterback for 2024, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Truthfully, I don't know how great either one of them are, but I think it's a conversation, and most people would probably agree with that. But that being said, I think that as much as, yes, it's all about wins and losses, there is also, especially when you're talking about that gray area of there isn't a completely obvious option, there are some politics involved in all of this. And my perception of how this all went down with the Steelers and Russell Wilson is that he came to the Steelers knowing that there was going to be a job opening at quarterback this upcoming season, and they worked out a contract extension. He signed a minimal deal to not burden the Steelers by any means. That being said, I don't know how great his value was anyways, but he signed a cheap contract with the Steelers, and then it was, sort of seeming to be his job. And then from that point on, obviously, Justin Fields just sort of happens to fall into the laps of the Steelers that they couldn't pass up on for technically it's a conditional 6th round pick that could become a 4th based off of playing time. I don't think the Steelers care all that much. If they get good production out of Justin Fields, they could probably care less about losing the 4th in comparison to the 6th. But I think that just the order of events of Russell Wilson being brought in first before Justin Fields, I think that was kind of what did it in terms of how this was ultimately decided. And again, Justin Fields, he had chances during the preseason to win this job, especially considering the fact that Wilson was dealing with a calf injury that kept him out for a week or so. Fields just never won the job in that opportunity. And the common, idea in the NFL and in sports generally speaking is that you can't lose your job to an injury, which I think is mostly true. It does open opportunities for other people, which it did for Justin Fields in this circumstance. If Justin Fields came out and started lighting these teams, on fire every time that he came out for the preseason games, I don't think the Steelers would have had a choice but to sign him, or to start him, I should say. And especially considering the fact that they would probably prefer that Fields ends up being the lead guy for them, considering that means they might have a quarterback for the future as well, as opposed to Russell Wilson, who feels like he's more of a one-year rental, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But I don't anticipate there being too many seasons left of Russell Wilson's career in the NFL. This feels like if he sort of flunks out here, it might be his last chance to be a starting quarterback. But, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section on that. I just feel like ultimately this is a move that the Steelers probably don't feel great about. It's just kind of a whatever move. And I understand. I'm a Patriots fan, and that's to some degree how I felt about the Patriots naming Jacoby Brissett the starter. I feel like Raiders fans can probably sympathize a little bit as well when you're talking about Gardner Minshew versus Aiden O'Connell, not to send off all of these sort of shots and put people in the crossfire. But, I'm really not moved by that quarterback room in Pittsburgh. And just the team as a whole, we'll see. And I'm not trying to be, overly negative or anything. I don't know how much either one of those quarterbacks really raises the ceiling. That being said, though, the Steelers don't necessarily need somebody to come in and light the world on fire. They just need consistency from the position, which is something that they did not get last year, and yet they still won 10 games during the regular season and made the playoffs. Between, a lot worse options. We'll leave it that. A lot worse, I'm not sure. Between when you're talking about Kenny Pickett to where Russell Wilson is today, there's probably not a dramatic drop-off there, but That being said, I mean, it goes even just beyond the quarterback itself. Offensive coordinator was a point of weakness for the Steelers. Did something pretty un-Steelers like in firing Matt Canada during the year. Now they bring in Arthur Smith, and what I've been saying as well is I do feel like Arthur Smith, he likes to involve the ground game and build off of that with play action. I think that Justin Fields can sort of play into that because of the fact that he is more of a threat running the ball than Russell Wilson is. So I probably, in a perfect world, would have chosen Fields to be the starter. But that being said, I also understand all the reasons as well. And as much as, I can talk about politics and everything, maybe Russell Wilson, because it was not impressive during the preseason with either one of them. That being said, it wasn't just about them. The offensive line, I thought, really showed some struggles, and it's not like they have the most talented wide receiver room in the world outside of George Pickens. So I think that ultimately, maybe Russell Wilson can be good. I'm not entirely ruling it out. I mean, there were stretches last year where Russell Wilson showed he was a quarterback that was at least good enough to be the starting option for a team that's winning games. Now, I've talked about this a number of times before. When the Broncos went on that winning streak halfway through the season last year, I think that more than anything, it was based off of the inordinate amount of turnovers that their defense, were able to create. That the turnover differential was very drastic for the Broncos in a positive light. So, I think that that's more so what it was about. But that being said as well, kind of the turnover differential, there's two parts to that equation. It's your defense playing well. It's also making sure that you're not giving the ball away. And Russell Wilson was reliable in that sense, that the Broncos were not a turnover heavy team. And Russell Wilson, if there's one thing you can say about him, it's that he has been I would argue, mature quarterback for the majority of his career. He was composed, he was poised. Even when you talk about sort of those Russell Wilson special plays where he's scrambling around in the backfield and he ends up making something happen, it was because of his level of maturity in my eyes that he didn't panic. When you're talking about Justin Fields, there's a lot more panic there, and there's a lot more room for things to go wrong. We saw him, I think it was 3 fumbles in his first 2 preseason games as well. So it's not like Justin Fields is, a screaming hot candidate either. Ultimately, I am not very confident in either one of them emerging as, even call it a top 15 quarterback in the league. I mean, that sounds disrespectful. I just also do think that the NFL is pretty deep at quarterback, and I think at this point with Russell Wilson and his age, I think he's a lot more limited from an arm talent perspective. Justin Fields, I think, provides a lot more upside, and again, the player that I would probably lean with starting, but I also understand, the Bears. When the Bears were, running with them, they were actually in some games late in the season, and he just wasn't able to hold on to the ball. I could be making this up as well, but I think there was actually a Broncos versus Bears game that occurred where Fields ended up turning the ball over twice in the fourth quarter. Again, fact check me on that if I'm wrong there, but I feel like I remember a Bears-Broncos game that ended up getting pretty ugly for Justin Fields at the end of it. So, I don't know. That's the difference in the quarterbacks that you are getting. Ultimately, I think also the Steelers are probably just going on the safer end, knowing a little bit more of what Russell Wilson is, understanding that he is capable of taking care of the ball. And this is a team that their defense is still really good, and they are very well coached. They have a lot of playmakers. The record, I'm not sure what it is at this point. The record with TJ Watt playing versus when he's not has been something that has been notable as of the past. But, I think that they're hoping that whoever steps in at quarterback can, the Steelers are 69-33-2 with TJ Watt actually playing in the games. Just sort of on a side note, talking about that defense, and I think that they want to build around the defense and just have a passable option at quarterback that isn't going to get caught up in emotions or the craziness of the game, that he can just be steady. I think Russell Wilson can be steady. I just don't think that he has the, upside either at this point in his career. But again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments.
Looking for your daily fix of
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We had a little bit of a technical issue at the end of that last segment, but we are now going to be moving on to our final topic of the day, where we will be talking about the comments made from former Patriots edge rusher Rob Ninkovich about the Patriots quarterback situation over the past couple years, and specifically what he had to say about Mac Jones. Mac Jones, obviously now in Jacksonville, was the first round selection of the Patriots in 2021. Was thought that he was going to finally be sort of the next quarterback of the future following Tom Brady's retirement and one season of an unsuccessful Cam Newton campaign, that Mac Jones was going to be the answer. And for 2021, I think that he did do just about everything he could. They won 10 games. He was selected to the Pro Bowl for whatever that's worth, and he had a good season. But from that point on, it just continued to get worse and worse. And talked about it on the show before. I think that that is in large part because of the incompetence of the Patriots front office and coaches, of not putting together a good enough surrounding talent for offensive line and receivers to actually help a young quarterback develop. I just don't think he ever really stood a chance based off of sort of his surrounding situations, but he also probably was never the guy at the end of the day. But that being said, former Patriots edge rusher Rob Ninkovich had some pretty harsh words about Mac Jones. Ninkovich was a starter for the Patriots for a handful of years in the 2010s, won 2 Super Bowls with the team, and he's still in tune with the Patriots. And he now hosts the Dan and Ninko show with Dan O'Brien. And yesterday there were some clips going viral about Ninkovich bad-mouthing Mac Jones a little bit. Dan O'Brien mentioned that Mac Jones doesn't like Ninkovich, and he proceeded to go off on him. He said that he would smack the bleep out of Mac Jones, and also included a pretty funny impersonation of Mac, just how timid he was at the press conferences, especially by the end. It was definitely something, as a Patriots fan myself, I felt bad for Mac Jones, but he almost painted the picture as well, just the way with how he spoke and what he said, as, a big-time victim as well. And, he took accountability. Some of the things he said was right, but it just kind of, it just didn't go down well in New England, whether it's Mac Jones' fault or not. So, pretty harsh words from Rob Ninkovich, the way that he went in on him. I would recommend, checking out that entire episode for more context on all of that. But Mac Jones just played pretty well in the preseason for the Jaguars, and it has led to a little bit of a conversation among Patriots fans and others about this idea that the Patriots should have decided to keep Mac Jones one last season and start to build up the remainder of the roster, because as we've seen in the preseason, even with Drake May now, who is their future, or at least is hoped to be that the offensive line is still a mess and the receivers still are also not very good. And with the third overall pick, they could have had a number of different options. They could have gone with either a receiver or an offensive lineman, Marvin Harrison Jr. or Joe Alt, or they could have potentially traded that third overall pick to move down a bit and accumulate a number of different draft picks for the future to fill out some of those holes and maybe still even potentially get a top 10 player in the draft. Now, you can't have it all. Patriots fans also are oftentimes very difficult to please ultimately. So I think that, where I have landed on this is the idea that I do understand how messy the situation is with the Patriots and that they have a lot of room to grow. I think when you're at the top of the draft like that, especially in a strong quarterback class, that you just have to take a swing at the best available guy. And it's not even like Drake May was some afterthought who, just kind of happened to be thrown into it because the Patriots needed a quarterback and he was available. Drake May was somebody that at the beginning of the 2023 college football season, there were legitimate talks about the idea of it was always going to be Caleb Williams being drafted number 1, but it was this idea that Drake May isn't actually as far away from Caleb Williams as previously thought. Now, ultimately, the momentum on that died, and May ended up falling to number 3 as Jaden Daniels put together a Heisman season and catapulted himself from probably what would have been outside of the first round to the number 2 overall pick. So, I think that it was a golden opportunity that the Patriots could not pass up on. But I do also understand that there are a lot of other issues with how this team is currently constructed, and they have a lot of room to grow. Mac Jones, what I'll say about him is, again, I defend him. I think if he landed in a different situation, I still look back to San Francisco when there was at least that sort of smokescreen about the idea of how Mac Jones could have potentially gone number 3, and then they ended up going with Trey Lance instead. I feel like if Mac Jones landed in San Francisco, there's a good chance he could still be the starting quarterback there. And Purdy, yes, at this point 100% is better, but I do wonder if Mac Jones would have had a more stable place to develop in. I wonder if he could have been able to actually pan out there because, again, his rookie season when things were more functional for the Patriots was actually pretty good, all things considered. And, yeah, they got their doors blown off in the playoffs against the Bills, but that was a Patriots team that probably shouldn't have been in the playoffs to begin with. Part of it was based off of Mac Jones. A lot of it was based off of, again, Bill Belichick. I still think that Bill Belichick, the coach, is a great option for any team. Bill Belichick, the general manager, sort of killed this Patriots run is even probably the wrong word to put because at that point, they hadn't won a playoff game in a handful of years and they had a Cam Newton year in there as well. But, Belichick was on a roll, I think, even in that Cam Newton year. I believe the Patriots won 7 games in 2020. There was really no way that they should have, or it was 2019. 2020, I don't know. The Patriots should not have won that many games, and Belichick kept the Patriots in it far longer than they should have been, but ultimately, again, bad roster decisions, and not just the roster itself, but obviously the entire coaching debacle of having Matt Patricia and Joe Judge as your co-offensive coordinators, and the mess that was just, it was too much for Bill Belichick to continue basically putting out fires that he was also creating while also trying to run a football team. He was just so spread thin, and by the end of it, he was just struggling to, do his job. But ultimately, I think they made the right decision. And, just to these quotes about Rob Ninkovich, the idea of, I understand, Mac Jones, even if he was a good talent, one of the big things that Ninkovich was sort of hitting on during all of this is the fact that he said that he needs a quarterback with some more nuts as his starter. And he obviously played under Tom Brady, or with Tom Brady, I should say. And he saw what that true leadership looks like. And even when, again, I'm a Patriots fan, I was probably overly optimistic pro Mac Jones for a little bit there. It's not like he ever screamed leader. And especially once the 2022 offseason when it was coming together with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, and they're playing these preseason games. It's like, oh, wow, this is going very poorly. Mac Jones was complaining all the way through, publicly sort of yelling at players and coaches on the sideline. And I get it. It must have been an extremely frustrating situation watching his professional career basically sabotaged by the people that were supposed to be nurturing him and helping him grow. But I do think that there is a very real difference in, as Rob Ninkovich put it, the demeanor between Mac Jones talking and Drake May talking. That being said, we've had a lot more experience with Mac Jones at the NFL level than with Drake May. You know, who knows what May will sound like after the Patriots offense doesn't show up and, you know, they potentially lose a game something like 10-3, or, you know, multiple of those games where last year they lost 3 games, I think it was, while allowing 10 points or fewer. And that just, you know, if that's the case again with the Patriots, obviously, hopefully it isn't for them. But, you know, what will Drake May sound like on the mic after that? I feel like it's a pretty tough go, especially when it's week after week, the offense continuing to not come up for them. Anything you say is going to get a little bit tiresome, and ultimately, I feel like Drake May is capable. First off, I mean, again, from a leadership and demeanor perspective, I think that he does just sound a lot more confident on the mic. Again, for whatever that's worth, in a more limited sample size, but I think it's that, and I think he's more capable physically and from a skill perspective of being the leader that the Patriots need to sort of get out of this funk that has been striking them for the past few years. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern, same time as always. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.